We do begin with Kid Rock, and as of tonight, GM says it's sticking with the singer's tour. However, representatives from GM and Chevrolet are meeting this week with the local chapter of the National Action Network to listen to their concerns. And so far, Kid Rock hasn't really officially commented on this issue. His spokesperson did speak to the Free Press, but during the recent flag protests in South Carolina, he told critics to kiss his... Well, you can fill in the blank there. Just 4 years ago, Kid Rock received an award from the Detroit NAACP, though he said he has never flown the Confederate flag with any hate in his heart. And that is where we begin our discussion tonight with our MiWeek contributors, Nolan Finley of the Detroit News and Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press. Nolan, let me start with you. What did you think when you first started hearing this brewing up the last 5 days?
Well, I thought what I always think when the Reverend Charles Williams and that group start squawking about something, that it's either a shakedown or they're looking for attention. I think in this case it's both. Kid Rock told the Free Press, or his people told the Free Press, I haven't flown that flag in 5 years and I'm not going to. But what he's not going to do is go out there and make some kind of statement coerced by Charles Williams to make it look like that group pushed him into doing this. He doesn't use the flag. He said he's not going to. It's a non-issue. It's non-issue for GM. I
think it was interesting that his spokesperson did just come out in the last 24 hours to the Free Press and said that it was that award that he got from the Detroit NAACP back in 2011 that really made him step back and think, and that, you know, he did say, you know what, I haven't flown it or used it in any of my shows since then.
Well, and I think that's the point, is that he ought to come out and say himself, here's what my history with that flag is. And I think we're at this sort of moment right now in this country where we are having more frank conversations about things that have been done, transgressions that have been indulged, and I think it's okay. In fact, I think it's okay for him. He might take advantage of that and say, listen, I used to do that, and here's why I stopped. Here's what I think of that now. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and I don't think that's coercion or bowing to somebody's demands. It's about recognizing that this symbol is in the middle of a pretty important conversation that we're trying to have about this country and its history and its present, and he's got some accounting to do, like a lot of other people.
I wholly disagree. I think it's absurd. I think he said exactly the right thing when asked about it. You know, kiss my fanny. If he chooses to come out and he sent his spokespeople to say that very thing, I don't know what folks want. You know, anybody who has ever had any sort of association with a Confederate flag now suddenly has to step up and throw themselves
That's actually my
sword.
next question. Do you have to, does everyone who have had any kind of affiliation with it have to now come forward, explain why they have?
I think if you're a public figure who is embracing this flag, it's not a bad idea at this point to talk about that. Why were you for it? You know, what was the embrace that you put around it, and why'd you do that? I don't think there's anything wrong with coming forward at this point and saying that.
I mean, he's explained that over and over. He said, you know, to him it was emblematic of Southern rock, which he was a big fan of, and it was during that period.
Specific group, and also a racist group.
And and he said, you know, it was sort of exemplary of his rebel spirit. What else do you want? You know, everybody shouldn't have to come forward and make some of this big weepy confession and go on Oprah and cry and say, oh my God, I'm sorry. I mean, he's not using the flag now. You've got this, you know, ragtag group that squawks and yells about everything, wanting a scalp, and he's not going to give him a scalp, and he shouldn't.
Okay, so General Motors is meeting with this group today, and they said, look, if they don't, you know, break affiliation with Kid Rock, then we're going to try to get a protest together, get people to say we're not going to buy GM products. How effective do you think that is going to be? Because it looks right now that GM is saying, okay, we're going to listen to your concerns, but Chevrolet is still sponsoring this summer tour.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sort of sells. I mean, for GM, it's about money, obviously, and there's nothing wrong with that, I suppose. It's a sponsorship. At the same time, again, I think the dismissiveness of any questioning of this, I think, is probably out of line.
There's no flag on that tour. He's not flying the flag. And you go into somebody's past and say, at one point, you, like a lot of other groups, had this flag out.
But I guess
you decided for good reasons. He explained his reasons. You're not going to do it. You know, I wouldn't be surprised at the end of this meeting, Charles Williams walks away with a check in his pocket, and that's the end of it, because that's what this is all about.
Really? You really think that that's?
I mean, it's a pretty cynical. That's a pretty
Over and
cynical.
over, but you know yourself.
Pretty cynical
over and over.
interpretation.
That's how this ends.
It's a pretty cynical interpretation of this particular moment. And I think that's not particularly helpful.
But once the guy says, "I'm not flying it," it's over.
Maybe not. I mean, the idea that you can just say, well, I used to do that and I don't do it anymore, and that's the end of it, I think is not necessarily.
Why not? Why shouldn't
it doesn't
it be the
have
end
to
of
be
it?
the end of it, is the point. I think the opportunity is to make it a wider.
If he
wider
chooses to do
debate.
that, if he doesn't want to be, if he doesn't feel
People won't go to-
evangelical about it, I don't think he has to come up.
Not a lot of black folks at
and
that concert
be-
anyway.
And be dragged out.
Let me tell you this. Sam Riddle, who spoke for the Action Committee in the paper, said, "quote, hang on. He said, quote, it's a flag that represents genocide to most of Detroit." Would you agree with that?
Well, it should represent genocide to almost anybody. I mean, I think that might be.
But it doesn't,
That
Steve.
might be technically the wrong word. It certainly represents insurrection on behalf of slavery. I mean, that's what it was, right? The Southern states who said we want to preserve the right to dehumanize African Americans and fought a war over it. That's what the flag symbolizes.
To you. But
no,
poll after poll of
It's
people
not
in the
about-
South, 87% of the people in the South, white people in the South, do not see it as a racist symbol.
Well,
and
this is exactly why that's exactly why the discussion that they're trying to have is important, because it doesn't symbolize any heritage other than that. It doesn't.
It does to those folks.
But you can't.
It does to those folks, and now to drag them all out and say, well, you have to apologize for that.
So-
Everybody who was who at any time placed one on a grave or do this has to come out.
So
and
when some
confess and
Germans,
maybe,
say that the Nazi flag represents a heritage to them, do they have a right to that interpretation?
It
Oh,
is
really?
not at all
Why
the
not?
same.
They are both symbols of a particular action, a particular set of beliefs, and those beliefs were, in this case, about slavery. That you can't say it was about anything else. I mean, this is part of the problem,
At the
is that
heart
there's
of
a lot of
the Civil War was
myth
slavery.
making.
Of course it was.
Well,
but it
so then
hasn't
what else
been,
is
it
it?
hasn't been 20 years since there was a raging argument in the black community among black scholars who didn't want to assign the Civil War entirely to slavery. They wanted to make it an economic war because they didn't want to convey the impression that these white armies fought to free black slaves.
But
you know that.
But the
I think we
idea
can- I
of
think we can
what's
also-
true and what's myth is important. And you can't just go and make up a story about what something was when it wasn't
you're
that.
not making up a story, Steve. It's
Sure
far
they are.
more complex. Not everybody who marched off under that banner was marching
Every
off
single
for
one of the
slavery.
states, every single one of the states who signed on to the Confederacy said that it was about said in their secession letters that it was about slavery. There was no ambiguity about that. That's what it was.
I think we can all agree on the fact that flying the Confederate flag now in a public place and glorifying it is no longer what this country should be about. But now the
But that's
question,
today. That wasn't 5 years ago
No,
when
but
Kid
the
Rock
question
did
is,
it.
but the question is now with Kid Rock is how far back do you persecute people for flying?
Not persecuting.
You know,
it is.
Let's talk about what
demanding
Let's talk
was-
about who was persecuted. I mean, see, again, the language here is all tilted. There is no way that you can say that people who fly the
You think Kid Rock
hold on,
went
hold
on
on,
that stage-
Hang
hold
on,
on a second.
hang on, finish,
There's no way
and then
you
you
can
get to
say
jump
that
in.
people who flew the Confederate flag have been persecuted. They are embracing a symbol of racism and insurrection. And so to call them onto the carpet
not
for
what
that
it
is
meant to
not
them.
persecution.
That's not what it
doesn't-
meant to them.
So if I go grab a Nazi flag and say, well, this means to me something different from what it's actually associated with, does that give me cover?
No, because it doesn't
No.
mean to anyone anything different than what it was associated. That's different than the Confederate
Why is that
flag
different?
that has been flying now 150
that's
years
absurd.
for a lot of different reasons.
No,
in a lot of
there was
different
one
places.
reason. There was one
think
reason.
When the Dukes of Hazzards painted that on the top of the General Lee, it was
I wasn't allowed to
let's
watch Dukes of Hazzard. We talked
glorify-
about
That's right. We
let's
did talk about that.
glorify
You were not allowed to
slavery.
watch
It's
it.
far more complex.
All right, so we're gonna take a step back from this, guys, and we'll see what GM has to say in meeting with the National Action Network this week.
that Kid Rock is the most important symbol in this debate.
No.
But I do think that there's an opportunity for him, like everybody else, to take this a little more seriously and have the discussion that we're having, which is that it is a symbol of something very specific, and you can't make up another story about that.
Of course you can, and he explained why he flew it, and it was a very plausible explanation.